Okay, welcome everyone to today's Volume Impact Investing webinar on the topic of how to change the world with your super. Q&A with Make Your Mark Super. My name is Camille, and before we start, I would like to acknowledge the First Nations people as the traditional owners of the land on which this meeting is taking place today, which for me is Meanjin, Brisbane. I recognize the country north and south of the Brisbane River as the home of both the Turrbal and Jagera nations. I pay deep respects to the elders past, present and future. Welcome again. It is a pleasure to see you all, and for our new attendees today, let me introduce Bloom and the purpose of this community event and our community events in general. At Bloom, we empower people to invest, to do good and fight climate change. We are on a mission to make climate impact investing easy and accessible. And part of this mission is to offer educational opportunities like this webinar today to propel the voices of impact investing and sustainable finance experts like Tom and Kurt today far and wide. The aim of our webinars is also to build a community of impact investors and people using their money power for good, because we need a greener, more circular and inclusive economy. And finally, at Bloom, we think sustainable investing should be accessible to everyone. And this is really what Make Your Mark is all about, as well as Bloom. We see a future where a carbon-free and inclusive economy allows people and the planet to thrive. Quick housekeeping. Please note this event is being recorded. The webinar will be made available to all the attendees after the event. We'll send an email with the recording. And a note from our lawyers, please be aware that the information that Kurt and Tom will be providing today, as well as myself, will be general in nature only and do not constitute personal financial advice. Before acting on any information from this presentation, you should consider how appropriate the information is in regard to your objectives, financial situation, and needs. Finally, this is a safe space, my friends. So you can ask any questions throughout the event by typing in the chat. I will ask our speakers some questions and we'll keep 15 minutes at the end. But Kurt and Tom are absolute experts in sustainable finance, so take advantage of it. You can pick your brain, you have an hour with them. Now, let me introduce the topic before we dive into the Q&A. Is your super, the big question today is your super invested in companies, funding, and fueling the climate crisis? According to the Responsible Investment Association of Australasia, more than 92% of Australians expect their super or other investments to be invested responsibly and ethically. And 78% of us are saying that they would consider moving super or to other investments to another provider if they were engaged in activities non-consistent with their values. However, there are still a lot of super funds invested in problematic industries and actively investing in fossil fuels. So how do we go about changing our super? Is it worth it? And beyond the popular exclusions, can our super deliver a positive impact? Can we really change the world? Now we have fantastic founders and experts on this topic today, the Make Your Mark founders. Make Your Mark is an ethical, sustainable and impactful super fund, changing the way people interact with their super. So today we are going to dive into how Kurt and Tom created an ethical superannuation option from scratch. And let me tell you, it's a difficult journey. How to approach ethical investing and select your investments, and how to spot and avoid greenwashing. Now, let me quickly introduce Kurt and Tom, because I want you to all know how brilliant they are, beyond all they've done with Make Your Mark Super. So Kurt, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Kurt Smith, you are the founder and CEO of Make Your Mark. You are an experienced company director with 15 years experience across superannuation and wealth management within the wealth management industry. You were responsible, if my notes are correct, for managing over 400 million worth of superannuation assets for some of the world's largest financial firms, such as Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, State Street, McKinsey and Co, and many more. So let's say you've been there, done that before Make Your Mark. But since then, you have created your own wealth management firm to make sure you invest in the things you really believe in. And before doing all of this, you had a bachelor in business and economics. You also have an advanced diploma in financial planning, so you actually know what you're talking about. And you have also completed sustainable finance studies at the Cambridge Institute of Sustainable Leadership. Tom, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Tom, you are also a founder and you are the head of operations at Make Your Mark Super. So you have an interesting journey. You started as a chemical engineer, and we'll dive into that a bit later, but you then transitioned across to wealth management, working as a financial planner, combining your personable skills and engineering experience to help people and work with them directly. Tom, you have also an advanced diploma in financial planning, and you are pursuing a master of financial planning. So welcome again. Let's dive into the Q&A. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and your personal journey? How did you go from both working in financial planning, wealth management, to creating your own super fund?
Yeah, great question. Do you want to take that, Kurt, or do you want me to take the first one?
Oh, you seem very eager, so you're more than welcome to jump in there.
Yeah, no problem. So first of all, I just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land which I'm on today. So I'm on the Wurundjeri people's land of the Kulin Nation. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders, both past, present, and future, and respects to any First Nations people that are present here today. So I think I have to rewind back the years because I do have a very diverse background, to say the least. Originally, I was a chemical engineer, like you said, and I had big dreams and aspirations of going to work in oil and gas. Now,
really?
which is quite bizarre considering my current position. But fortunately enough for me, when I did graduate, the jobs just weren't quite there. And this is a decade ago now. So I thought, what's the next best thing I can do in life? And that was to go backpacking around the world. So packed my bags, went around the world and saw some beautiful parts of this planet. And that trip was really pivotal in my life because I came to the realization whilst on that trip that I wanted to do something different. And I wanted to work for purpose and not fall into the typical progressing up the career ladder. So I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I came back from that trip and I packed my bags and I fulfilled a lifelong ambition of moving out to Australia. And so when I moved to Australia, I was originally working out in the lab in Western Sydney as an engineer, funnily enough. Quickly realized that that wasn't for me. So like you said, I studied further in finance and went into wealth management, where Kurt and I crossed paths. And that was a fantastic experience for myself because I got to work with everyday people and helping them invest for the future. And part of that role, we would build portfolios on the client's behalf. And this is where the penny had dropped because we started to see that there were glaring issues within the superannuation industry and in particular sustainable finance that were not being addressed. And this really became a perfect storm for myself because it presented an opportunity where I could combine my values of working for purpose as well as addressing the issues that I saw in the industry. And I guess I combined them all into one, and it really led me down the pathway which I'm on today with Make Your Mark.
That's awesome. What a journey from oil and gas, almost oil and gas, to
this close.
Back on the right path to sustainable finance. Look, let's also say that, the oil and gas industry is massive in Australia. So there's a lot of people working in it, and it's about the transition, right? There's no...
Absolutely. It's not about demonizing the industries. It's that we're a country built on a lot of these industries, and many of the works and people involved need support through the transition. It's not a matter of blowing them up unconscionably. So it is very much about a transition and how we do that moving forward.
Kurt, how about you? How did you? So you were in the wealth management sector before. You were
Yep.
really already deep into the superannuation. How
Yep.
come did you one day think, you know what, I'm going to create my own? What was the trigger there?
Yeah, there was a few, but I'd just firstly also like to acknowledge the Gayamargal and Garigal as the traditional custodians of the land, which I am today, which is the Northern Beaches of Sydney. And yeah, as you mentioned, I mean, that intro, I felt a bit, you know, wow, talk a bit of an overstatement, but not an overstatement, but you know, hearing it from yourself. But I've had a long career. Funnily enough, I've had my whole career in superannuation, and that wasn't by choice. I didn't have dreams as a young boy to get into superannuation. I did work experience with a bank as a 17 and 18-year-old. It was part of school, and went straight into wealth management at the age of 18. And it was actually right into superannuation. But
wow, very early.
It's very early. I was sitting around, you know, I was the youngest by 20, 30 years back in those days. But it means that I've been in the industry for a very long time, and I've seen it go through the many iterations that it has. But I think for me, fundamentally, is I grew up in nature. I was very fortunate. I basically grew up in the ocean. I grew up, you know, bushwalking, and it was just being outside was just the way that I grew up. So I've always had a real connection and appreciation for nature
and country. Yeah.
That's always been there. It still is there. I actually used to have long blonde hair, but as I've gotten older and
really? Typical surfer.
A typical surfer sort of lifestyle, but spending too much time in a corporate building, I think it fell out. But look, I progressed quite, as you mentioned. I worked in corporate in wealth management for a number of banks, both domestic and international. And as I progressed, I progressed quite quickly, but I started noticing things going on around me that really just didn't sit right. Even though there are still issues, you know, going back, you know, almost 20 years, the banking and wealth management scene was still full of a lot of cowboy sort of stuff. And
yeah, what was wrong exactly? Can you give us examples?
It's more around some of the practices where I think the main thing that would stand out is clients' best interests. That's a key one, is in dealing with customers and everyday people in all the different facets that there is with wealth management and banking.
Are we really investing for the best interests?
Well, it's more about the ethical treatment of people, you know, and when you're managing customers and people's, you know, money and wealth, are you treating them with respect, and are the practices and actions that you're doing really have them in your best interest?
This is very profound, because there's also the other loop of, are the things you invest in their best interest as well in the long term? So there's a double loop here. How do you treat your customers, but also and we've seen this with you know, young people suing their superannuation fund because they were investing in you know, climate negative investments, and they've won, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, so look, I did that for several years, and I became a bit disillusioned with it all because of what I was seeing. And I thought, you know, at the sprightly age of 25, I knew better, and went and started my own wealth management practice back then. And built that, and that's where Tom and I crossed paths, is through that experience. And we grew that business, but ultimately the licensing structures for those types of businesses still had, you know, the large corporate entity at the top that controlled a lot of the decisions. So when we started looking at things like, you know, sustainable investment, sustainable finance, we still had the apprehension from above, trying to put controls on what we could and couldn't do. So
that's right. Yeah. For the benefit of the audience, financial planners often have what is called an approved product list, within which they work. So as a planner, you have, I'm not a planner myself, but my understanding is some planners have to work with a certain set list of investments they can play with, and that can be frustrating when you believe in ethical investing and there are things that you want to consider and they might not be on the list.
Yeah, and they're looking at things like how much money can be made out of it. Things that we're not typically looking at. But look, it's for us, it was a bit of a, not a light bulb moment, but there was growing frustration with where we saw some glaring issues that we believe needed to be addressed. And again, it festered for a while, and we thought, okay, if we can't do it under this structure, what is another way that we can do it? And we pondered on it for a long time. But for me personally, the birth of my son was the real kick. It was a real kick in the butt.
Okay.
For me, it was about, look, if we're going to do something, we need to do something now. And it really, it was about the bigger picture. I'm thinking about the future a lot more. I started getting more existential to say, we've got these issues, and can I sit by and allow this to happen and sort of point out all the issues but not do anything about it? So there was a bit of that profound sort of, experience where, we'd been in the industry for a long time. We saw the issues, and we had the nudge to say, look, we want to do something about this.
Yeah, what will be my legacy? And yeah, how I can change things.
Absolutely.
That's profound. I didn't know that your son was a trigger. That's wonderful. Now let's dive into Make Your Mark Super. So can you tell us a bit more? I've said a few words about what it was, but where are you at in the journey?
Yeah.
And then I'll dive into, I would love you to dive into why is the super industry in some cases problematic, and why does it matter to invest our super sustainably? But let's start with Make Your Mark.
Absolutely. Look, so full disclosure, Make Your Mark, we haven't issued our PDS to market yet, which means we don't offer the product publicly, but we will in the near future. So we are a brand new super fund, and we do two things really well. We generate competitive returns by investing in companies, industries, and technologies of the future that are good for people and the planet. So similar to as you mentioned with Bloom before. But what we also do is we provide a world-class experience that is changing the way people are interacting with their super. So Cami, as you know, or you'll be familiar with, but unbeknownst to the public, is the superannuation industry has been one of the biggest backers of harmful industries to people on the planet, and for decades, and they've relied on the apathy of Australians for it to go unchecked for a long time. So we're here to put a stop to that, and we're here to clean up the industry, the super industry for good. So this is why, it's over 3 years now that Tom and I set out to create a game-changing, true-to-label offering that also addressed the member disengagement and bring people's super to life.
So there's two pieces here. It's very interesting. There's the engagement from us, because yeah, let's face it, when was the last time, I'm passionate about this, but question to the audience, when was the last time you had a look at your super? It's not every day, right, that you wake up and you're like, hold on a second, what's in my super? So yeah, this engagement piece is so important, and where is the money going?
So just, I mean, on the interest, so what people are disengaged, and it's very common. But there are things that are working in the background that have led to this disengagement, and it's not something that is readily at the forefront of people's minds. It's just, look, I don't think about it, and that's just the way that it is. But the construct of the industry, the way the industry is operated, and the laws governing the industry have actually created this storm, that the reason why we have this apathy. So
absolutely, and also as a provider, there's so much regulations on how to talk about super that sometimes it's just really hard to actually talk about it, because there's certain things you cannot say. There's a lot of regulations. Can you describe the super industry and the different options available today, and why does it matter to invest our super sustainably?
Okay. How much time have you got? No, I'll try and keep it brief and not too complex around the industry. But superannuation is huge. It's huge and it's complex. That's simply the way to
How huge? Can you give us a number? I think I have a few in my mind. But...
Well, so it's reported 3.4 trillion from March, but I've actually seen figures that it's over 3.7 trillion now. So that's the total.
3.7 trillion. So the question to the audience: what could we do if we harvest the power of this money?
Yeah, and that's really where the discussion around what is the power of super, comes from, because it is, and even with 3.7 trillion, just to give you context, that makes us the fourth largest pension pool in the world.
That's incredible.
So,
very few people are holding an incredible amount of power and money, right? In the grand scheme of things.
Exactly. So one of the issues around the super industry is it's quite complex. It is one of the benefits is it was made compulsory back in the early 90s, and that's why it is the size it is today, because very few countries around the world have made it compulsory, particularly for that long. But some of the legacy issues with the industry is super was traditionally very restrictive. It was linked to your employer or the industry that you worked in. You were locked into that, so you had no control, you had no choice. It didn't matter what fund that you're in, the fee structure, the types of investments, you had no control or choice, and there was no legal requirement to disclose the holdings. So it was this locked up secret thing that you couldn't get information about, and then you had no control. So this is
for the audience, holding is the actual investment within the fund, for some people who might not be familiar with that.
Correct. I've got to be careful with that. But so when your employer pays super on your behalf, it goes into an account that is against your name, and the money is invested on your behalf. So it doesn't just sit in cash. The majority of the time, the employer or the super fund will make that decision on your behalf.
And will invest in other things, that's right, within a fund.
Correct. And if you just think about, and this is what I was saying before, if you just think about that structure of no control, no information, and
no
transparency, that's where the apathy comes from. The culture of apathy in Australia to super is, well, I don't know anything about it. The information isn't forthcoming. It's too complex and I can't find the information.
And my super never talks to me as well. I mean, I'm not mine, but I think a lot of super purposefully don't email, don't talk to their customers, right?
Absolutely. So this dials into the next part, which is the super industry as a whole has never had to be competitive, because they weren't fighting each other for customers. It was guaranteed. They had an industry locked down, and whoever joined that industry, the superannuation money just flowed in. Easy. And that's made the industry lazy. Now, unfortunately, what that means as well is over 80% of Australians sit in a default investment option. So because of this apathy, it means that over 80% of superannuation accounts sit in a default investment fund, which means it's being invested on your behalf, and you're unlikely, and it suggests that you're unlikely to know what's actually going on behind that. Now, luckily these days there is a lot more control. Some of the laws have been unwound for that reason, to create competitiveness and give people choice. And now there's a real opportunity that we can start to unwind some of the issues that have been created by the laws, and also what the super industry has taken advantage of. And we'll get into it a little bit more today, I'm sure, but it means that as an individual, we can start to take charge and use our money for good and create the world that we want. Whereas for many decades, this wasn't actually possible.
That's right, and being more in control of the fees and somewhat the returns as well. Yeah. This is great information, and I didn't know about this 8% figure. That's incredible.
It's astonishing.
Can you give us an example of how super can drive a positive impact?
Absolutely, yeah. And I just realized I didn't touch on the sustainability side of your question. I don't mind jumping onto that now if you like, or we can.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Why does it matter to invest our super sustainably?
The reason why I wanted to answer that is because even beyond superannuation, we need to look at from a humanity perspective of humanity. We simply can't continue at the rate of consumption that we are now. So it's estimated that we're actually consuming 1.8 worlds currently to support the way that we live. So the word sustainable, is not actually a marker to work towards. It's probably more of a flaw, but it is a good start. But we're actually well beyond trying to sustain the levels at which we consume on the planet currently. So there are far bigger issues at play, but what it means in terms of super is extremely powerful. We spoke earlier about the size, and the size of super of 3.7 trillion means superannuation is a huge pool of capital. And we've got one of the biggest pools of capital in the world. And like I said before, as a member, you're a part of that process. You're a part of that system. And your money is being invested in companies and industries to help them grow. Now, if you haven't made a choice, which I mentioned before, your money is highly likely invested in industries that are harmful to people on the planet. So the reason why it's important to invest sustainably is there is a huge opportunity to start to divert capital into solutions, industries and technologies that are looking to address sustainability and development issues around the world. So it doesn't really matter sort of what side of the fence you sit on. Like, I'm sure that we've had a lot of progress where you still get climate denialism, but there is no doubt, no matter where you sit, the world is transitioning. Governments, not at the rate that we need, but the world is absolutely transitioning. So even if this doesn't make sense from a moralistic standpoint, it actually makes economic sense to invest more sustainably, because there are absolutely companies and industries that won't exist in the future. There is no denying that. But there are also a lot of companies and industries that are going to either help with the transition or at least benefit significantly from that transition. So it makes economic sense to invest sustainably as well.
I love that. I think this is really important. It's a point we try to make when we talk to our customers as well. There's the positive impact, but there's also the big economic shift happening that people should get exposed to and benefit from. Can you give us an example of how super can drive a positive climate impact?
Yes, well, I guess there's endless examples. I don't want to keep referring back to the same thing, but if you just think about the pool of money that is there that can be invested. So there is a huge amount of available capital that can be invested in companies that are looking to create climate solutions, essentially. So there's a few examples or typical ways that super funds or asset managers can create positive climate impact and more develop. It's not just climate. Climate is just one of the 17 development goals from the UN, but it's obviously a very important one that influences them all together. But we speak about rediverting capital, so divestment, so moving money away from harmful industries, and then investment, so redistributing that money into industries and companies that are well placed to help fight climate change. So, you know, an easy one to conceptualize is, instead of investing in companies extracting and burning fossil fuels, you invest in companies that are building, you know, renewable energy, you know, or creating renewable energy or technologies around renewable energy. There's endless examples, but that's sort of an easier one to conceptualize.
Tom, Tom or Claire, can you give us an example? Like, for example, you have a set of companies. Who would you divest from and who would you invest into? Not saying that this is advice, but just to give people a practical example of that.
I'd love to be able to give you a specific company names, but because we haven't issued the PDS, we can't talk about the underlying holdings yet. So we're getting caught up in a bit of a legal red tape there.
Okay, I understand. Let's say from fossil fuel companies to, let's say, renewable energy, solar energy, wind energy.
Exactly. So
companies.
that's the easiest one to conceptualize. So we actually, the way we look at it is it's about sustainable energy. So you have a broader context to say, okay, how do we approach energy as a society or as humanity? How are we going to transition from the way we produce energy now to the way that we produce energy in the future? And where is the investment or the capital going to flow to support that? So sustainable energy is not just about renewable energy, but we've also got to think about, you know, the way that we store energy, the way that we move energy around, so the infrastructure that's required for that. And then it flows all the way through. As if we're building batteries, what are all the resources that go into that? So it does get complex once you break it down, but the easiest way to conceptualize the top line is the fossil fuel and you know, instead of a coal mine per se, you're investing in, you know, wind farms or solar farms or hydro or bio or things like that. So that's the easiest way to conceptualize the redistribution of capital. But another example, which I think is great it's not, I guess you could tie it into climate solution because it's cigarettes or tobacco, but it's more dialed into divestment and a story around how you can actually influence things through super and make big changes. So unbeknownst to most people, and I use this quite a lot because I find it shocking, and most people do, is that most super funds were invested in big tobacco up until 2018. Now, if you think about how society has advanced in terms of, tobacco and the views on it, we still had our super funds investing in tobacco companies all the way up to 2018. That's only 5 years ago. Now, and when we talk about investing, what that translates into is your super fund is using your money to invest in companies that produce tobacco or tobacco-based products. And your money is used to help grow that business. It helps them develop their product lines. It helps them distribute their cigarettes and products around the world. So once you break it down to that and you speak to people and you say, did you know this? And most people say, I had no idea. If you knew about it, would you change it? Absolutely.
Absolutely. And the same goes for weapons as well.
And so now there are so many categories of that. And the good news is a lady by the name of Dr. Bronwyn King in 2010 noticed that her industry super fund was investing this way. And it didn't sit well with her. And she started to make a fuss. And then she started to campaign. And, fast forward several years to 2018, most super funds started divesting out of big tobacco.
That's right.
And
so this is how individuals can.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's an example of one industry, and it doesn't mean that we apply it to all industries, but certainly when it comes to things like fossil fuels, there needs to be urgent and dramatic action. And at Make Your Mark, that's what we believe, and that's how we approach our investing as well.
Thank you. I think that was a really clear example. Now, the superannuation industry is really complex. So how did you create Make Your Mark? Can you give us a little summary of how you went about that?
Yeah, I'll be happy to take this question.
Okay, you can
great.
have that.
It's a great question. We get asked this all the time. As you know, Cami, being a startup, it takes blood, sweat, and tears. And it was no different for us. It took 3 years of complex work, and complex for good reason, because at the end of the day, we're dealing with people's retirement. And we have to ensure that they're in the best retirement possible. So we have a huge responsibility, and that requires a huge level of governance, which takes time. So for myself and Kurt, 3 years ago, we had the shared vision that super could be done differently. And after identifying the major issues that we saw within the industry, it took an immense amount of research to identify whether or if we could actually solve them. And once we believed we could solve these issues, we formed Make Your Mark and began pitching it to the market. And we were amazed and thrilled by the response that we got as we picked up prominent investors very early on who had backed super funds in the past. And that really gave us the confidence that we're on the right track with Make Your Mark. And it actually allowed us to be surrounded by the best minds within the industry. But as you know, when you're in a startup, having an idea is fantastic, but you actually have to go out and, build on the offering and execute on the idea. And this required, I guess, a huge level of collaboration with not just the regulator, but you also have the asset consultants you're working with, you have the investment managers, you have the trustee. And this type of collaboration isn't short term. It literally takes years and years of building out the offering, constantly fine tuning to the point that we could finally deliver on our vision that, I guess, super could be done differently and can be used for a force for good. And on a personal level as well, you have to show, or you have to have a lot of resilience, because there is no playbook to creating something like Make Your Mark. And you have to get very comfortable in that notion of 1 step forward and 2 steps back, essentially. But yeah, we had the conviction. And that really drove us forward throughout the 3 years, and it allowed us to get to the position which we are in today. That's
incredible, that resilience, and indeed starting an any investment product from scratch is incredibly hard. And that's why often big groups are leaders in the industry, because they already have the resources, the people, the connections. So yeah, well done you two to go through all the journey to the point where you're ready to launch. Can I ask, let's dive into the DNA of Make Your Mark. I can feel like your personal journey and beliefs have shaped the direction of the business, but can you tell us why Make Your Mark is different?
Yeah, sure. So I'm happy to take that one if you don't mind, Kurt.
Go for it, mate.
Yeah, so I guess we get asked this question a lot because we do have competitors in the industry who have carved a great pathway for brands like us to be introduced to the market. So first and foremost, we're addressing this issue of greenwashing within the industry. So we provide a strong, sustainable, authentic, best-in-class product. But for us, it's not just about ticking the box to say, hey, we're sustainable. We also want to address this major issue of member disengagement that's completely rife within the industry. I know we just touched on it earlier, but quite frankly, the current experience isn't working. And as Kurt mentioned before, 80% of Australians are in their default option. Now, that isn't a coincidence. That's down to the super fund's behavior and lack of activity to the member. And as you said before, Cami, the idea that you can send an annual statement to the member with complex financial jargon and that be your only form of communication.
And that's enough.
It adds no value to the member. And it's not good enough. And we're also starting to see super funds claim to be transparent, but are providing a data dump of thousands of businesses that sit within their portfolio and gifting that to the member, which adds completely no value.
Yeah, here's a spreadsheet. Thank you.
Yeah,
that really helps me understand where my money is invested.
Exactly. So when people ask, why are we different? Well, we believe that super and investing can be so much more than words and numbers on a page. And that's really important for us. And that's why we have such a focus on member experience. And we like to coin the term, we want to bring super to life. We want people to be engaged with their money and their super and be empowered by the choices that they're making.
I love this. So what does that actually mean? Let's dive into how do we bring our super to life?
Yeah, sure. So at its core, it means connecting people back with their money. It's as simple as that. And we do this by, I guess, for us, we're going to be flipping the script on the member experience side of superannuation completely on its head. Now, as I touched on before, the current experience isn't working. And so for us at Make Your Mark, we've taken up the responsibility on behalf of the industry to do better and go further with the investing and the storytelling side of it. Because for us, we believe that there's so much value that can be added to the member by showing them the positive impact that their money is creating. And we want to bring them on the journey because at the end of the day, they've made the decision to invest sustainably. They should see that. And we do this in a number of ways. We do this by, first and foremost, we provide tangible value. So rather than the words or the list of businesses that sit within the portfolio, we do business profiles. So what that business actually does, which gives context to the member. We also do storytelling. So we do a storytelling side of the investment. So real life world examples of how that business is operating. And we do impact reporting. So we show how the members' money is actually creating impact. And I guess as a business stance, we don't just do this as a nice to have. We truly believe that we're, I guess, more than a tick box to say we're sustainable. We want to empower people with their superannuation again.
I love this. This is so cohesive with my own vision with Bloom. I think we should reconnect people with the real world where the money is actually invested and show them what it can bring to the world. So this is wonderful. And I love your view on the transparency piece. This is wonderful. What's also very exciting is once one super fund starts doing this better, then the whole industry has to respond and also do better. The same, it goes back to the example you used with the tobacco. One super fund starts excluding and talking about it, and then all the super funds are like, oh, how about us? We need to catch up. And this is how you make systemic change. So I love this. This is great, Tom. How do you guys approach investing? What's your? I understand you do this sustainably, and you coined the term best in class. But can you tell us a bit more about how you approach your strategy?
Yeah, look, I'll cover that, and I'll try not to get into too much into the. I'm more than welcome, like happy to, but just mindful of.
Yeah, we probably have maybe 20 minutes left, and I want to keep time for the audience. So
of course, look, I guess like I'll cover off the formality side of it first, just from a structural perspective. So we have a multi-asset, multi-manager strategy, and we look to seek risk-adjusted returns that positively impact people on the planet. So that's what we do. But the manager style that we adopt means that we have our own our own internal investment committee. We work with an asset manager and also an independent asset consultant. And what we do is we through that process is we look to identify the best in class managers that specialize in fields across ethical investing, sustainable investing, and impact investing. So it means from a portfolio perspective, it's very strong. It's quite diversified across all the industries and technologies that we've mentioned before, and really with the goal of allowing the world or assisting the world transition to a low carbon economy, fight things like climate change, and benefit society. So in terms of what that means, you know, maybe some investments that you may see, we did touch on this earlier, but you know, the portfolio can have anything from renewable energy production or storage investments, sustainable packaging, health technologies, sustainable materials, recycling, safety equipment. Much of the things, you know, we've seen Bloom, you know, talk about and showcase with what you do. It's these industries that are really placed well to help with the transition and to where we want to go. But look, beyond all of this, and to really tie it all together, is we believe you actually need to show the impact as well. And if we want people to engage with their money, like we say, we need to show the impact as well. It's a part of the story that's been missing this whole time. Whenever you look at how money is performing, traditionally, you just look at the financial return, but there is so much more that goes into behind that story. So we've invested a lot of time and resources into having the ability to report impact. So this is a bit of a game changer for us. So what we can do is when we're reporting and we're connecting people into their money and we're showing the companies they're invested in, the real life examples, we can then actually show how that investment or how that company is contributing towards sustainable development goals. We can show how that company is tracking towards Paris-aligned targets. So how specific companies are tracking towards net zero by 2050. And there are a whole host of additional metrics that we can show as part of the member experience. So it's really to round out that experience where it's not only showing, you know, generating the positive returns that positively impact people on the planet, but then having in the impact reporting to really bring it to life. And I know we keep calling bring it to life, but it really is a big part of what we do. So we're trying to, by doing this, we're trying to create the story that engages and gets people active with their money.
And I guess this is very important, that measurement. I think this is perhaps the step between sustainable investment and impact investing. Impact investing is being very intentional and measuring.
Exactly.
Do you just say that you're good and pick a few things, or do you actually measure to make sure you're actually delivering positive impact? And this is the hard work.
Absolutely. There are so many different. The reporting side of impact is one of the most difficult challenges that we face, and it's probably not something that's obvious to the consumer yet. But it's, you know, we're looking at measuring things that can be subjective, and so there's a lot of work that's going into developing frameworks so that we can look at how investments are actually measured as, you know, are they impactful? Well, if they're impactful, what does that actually mean? And how do we break that down? And, you know, how do we measure one company that's in this field, you know, versus another company that's in a completely different field and match them up? So it is a challenge. We believe we've got very strong basis for that. We use an independent data warehouse to do it, experts in their field. But you're right, impact investing is about intentionality, and we love impact investing. We want to see more of it, particularly in the superannuation space. We have a lot of big dreams and ambitions around impact investing. The superannuation industry has a whole layer of additional, legal frameworks that we have to deal with that are not there for traditional non-super investments. So when we're dealing with investments, and we have to make sure that it's members' best interest first. That the regulator does not care necessarily, even though they've put out guidelines, they don't necessarily see sustainable or ethical investing as a rationale for either taking on additional risk or sacrificing returns. That doesn't fly. So for us, we have these ambitions, but we've always got the member at the front of our minds, and that we're always able to deliver the outcomes for the members. So, but impact investing is a really brilliant space, and there's a lot of positive stuff coming out. There's so much more work to be done, but we're a huge fan.
That's awesome. Thank you. And thank you for giving that example of how you have to balance the returns and the impact, but you do both. You don't have to compromise, is the message.
Absolutely. Yeah. That was, sorry, you go.
No, you go.
I was actually going to say that was one of our biggest challenges with the portfolio, and it's why it took as long as it did, because when we started out, we always said if we couldn't do it right, we weren't going to do it. If we couldn't, because fundamentally this came from noticing how much, excuse my French, BS was going on behind the scenes with funds saying that they were sustainable or ethical or impactful. And as soon as you looked in the underlying holdings, or so the investments that were under there, it was absolute nonsense. They're investing in the exact same things, and there was no regulation around it. And so for us, when we started, we went, okay, if we're going to do this, we have to do it right, and we're not going to compromise. And if we have to compromise, we have to walk away. And building a portfolio like this, and as you probably know, there's so many opportunities to cut corners. But when you cut corners, you end up looking like the exact competitors that you're coming up against for what they're doing. And that meant we just, using an asset consultant for one, we had to add these additional layers. We had to stress test the portfolio. We had to run it back 20 years and test it, how it would have performed through the tech bubble and the GFC and all of these scenarios, to make sure that even though it had very good sustainability businesses and industries in it, how would it perform against its peers during these times? And we have to demonstrate to our trustee that the fund is comparable. So it can't take on the additional risk, and it can't forego risk-adjusted returns. And we were able to demonstrate that, but it took a lot of work, a lot.
I can only imagine. And this is the beauty of sustainable finance, and something I'm quite passionate about. And I try to explain this in my journey, is that we are held to the same standards, but we hold ourselves to an extra layer of, I guess, ethic. So it's not, it is the ethic, and the impact is the cherry on top, I guess. And it's harder. So one more question, and then I'll I'll give the audience some space and time to ask you questions directly. You are currently in a crowdsource funding campaign, and I would love to talk about this because this is so important, and I want our community to be aware of how this works and how they can support you. So can you tell us more about this?
Okay, great. Yeah, look, so another advice warning. I'm not a lawyer, so I can talk to Crowdsource Funding campaign just a little bit about what it is and how it works, but obviously it's not personal advice. And we haven't started Crowdsource Funding, but we're looking to do that in the next couple of weeks. But maybe just a really brief introduction to Crowdsource Funding, what it is about, and then maybe how it ties into our business. So It's relatively new. It was introduced in 2017 by ASIC and some work that ASIC was doing with Treasury and government. And the reason for it is there were unintended consequences in the Corporations Act that made it very difficult for startups or small businesses, almost impossible, in fact, to raise funds publicly. So typically, if you raise funds, you can do it on the stock exchange by issuing shares. But when it comes to private companies who don't have that access, it becomes very difficult. And there's some clauses in the Corporations Act that restrict it unintentionally.
Can I just jump in? So raising funds for people in the audience essentially means exchanging parts of your company, so shares, for money. So is it right to say that?
Yep. Yeah. So look, I hate to use this as an example, going completely off script, but if you think about, I don't know if you've seen the show Shark Tank. It's a terrible show, but the point is that, you know, founders and creators come up with ideas and companies, and it might be a technology, it might be a service or an innovation, and they basically fund it themselves until the point that what they've created is at a point where it can go to market, but it needs money injected into the business so that it can start advertising, hiring staff, and doing these things if the founders can't fund it themselves. And this is typically how it works in Australia and around the world. And so the process of raising capital is you package your business up into a big presentation. You either go out and do market testing and all sorts of things, but you go to the market and you say, hey, we're a business. Here's the idea. Here's what we've created.
We want to do this. Do you want to be part of it?
We want to change the world, and this is how we're going to do it. And here's the business plan. And you can, if you can fund us, then you can become one of the shareholders, and you can either become a strategic shareholder where you invest a lot of money and you come and sit on the board and you help make decisions and you help us grow. And that's where the Shark Tanky sort of style is. But by virtue of investing in a business, you become a shareholder. So you become part of that business. You can become part of that journey. And it's obviously you're looking for financial returns, but you're also getting sort of an inside run at a company and being part of the journey, which is exciting. And so that was very limited. The scenario is very limited for small and companies in Australia. So crowdsource funding was introduced to try and change that. So crowdsource funding allows for companies to raise for much lower barriers of entry. So you can invest in a company for as little as $250. You don't have to qualify as a sophisticated investor, which is a terrible way to quote a person, but that's the terminology they use. But it basically means that small businesses can get access to capital to grow, and they can invite shareholders to invest in the business and get involved in the journey.
Yeah, and everyday Australians can own a little slice of a company.
Exactly. It's not exclusive. And it dials really much into our DNA that it's not exclusive. We want this business to be, part of the community and for the people. And we thought, what better way to enhance our offering by allowing ownership in the business, which quite frankly is not common, particularly in what we do. It's usually locked up and guarded, and shares to particularly smaller investors is not given away easily, where we thought, let's turn it on its head. Let's make this for everyone. The more the merrier. And if people believe in what we're about and the change that we want to create, then we would welcome people with open arms. So
they can be part of the journey. So we have just 5 minutes left. So quickly, how can people get involved? So do they jump on your website, sign up to the newsletter? How does that work?
Yeah, look, because we haven't launched it, the best way to do it is we can put a link in the chat function, which is just a contact us. So our website you can go to, which we can also provide.
Make your mark super. I will also add that to the email that we'll send after the event.
Fantastic. Yeah, look, so if you just contact us through the contact channel and let us know if you're interested, we can provide more information as it comes through. So it's all pretty simple, and yeah, it's really exciting times ahead.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm very excited for your campaign. I love the idea of a super fund owned by its members. It's a great, it all makes sense. We have a question from the audience. So, yeah, it's a great question about greenwashing. So, isn't showing only positive impact a form of greenwashing in and of itself?
So what was that? Only showing positive?
Yeah, so I guess that's a very good question. So when you communicate on your sustainable investing, is it greenwashing to put so much emphasis on the positive impact, but maybe not talk about the issues? And
I think with any sort of information given, you have to give an unbiased position, and so we're certainly not in the business of only promoting positive information for companies. The way that we report impact goes both ways. So we're in a situation where, you know, every company that you invest in is going to have a negative impact. Absolutely. And so what we need to do when we're doing any form of investing is we need to look at the business holistically and look at how they're performing in many different areas. And that's the way that you make decisions. And it's the same with reporting. So I agree that only reporting positive is a form of greenwashing, because only reporting or communicating one point of view it means that you're not disclosing all the information. So we mentioned earlier, as one of the things we can report is we can show how a company is tracking towards Paris-aligned targets, so how they're tracking. So when we do that, we can show each sector, and we won't just show where they're actually doing it well, we show where they're actually doing it poorly. And this dials into shareholder engagement, is that we can engage with companies and talk to them about the issues and challenges that they face. They may have certain practices or issues within their business that don't sit well, and we can engage with them and talk to them about that and see if there is transition plans, that we can see if they're looking to make changes around that. So yeah, greenwashing is really about reporting. To avoid greenwashing, you have to report all information as a bare minimum. Not just paint the pretty picture.
Yeah, exactly.
Because every single company is tied up in fossil fuels in some way, shape, or form. Every company pollutes, you know, so that it's about looking at it from a holistic perspective and taking that into account.
Thank you. Great answer. We are reaching the end of this webinar, so maybe if there's a final word that you guys want to say to the audience, you can say a little word, and then I will wrap up with a conclusion.
I would say that superannuation is one of the quickest, easiest, and simplest ways to reduce your carbon footprint, and highly recommend looking under the hood of your current fund to see what's happening, because sometimes, or a lot of the time, it's quite scary.
You'll be surprised, yeah.
I think you took my one there, Kurt. So, yeah, just to reiterate what Kurt said, your choice of super can be the largest contribution you make to the planet, and it's available for everyone to make that choice. So, like we said before earlier on the podcast, 8% of people are still in that default option. There is still so much potential that can be utilized from superannuation. So it does make an exciting future ahead.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us, by the way. We really appreciate it. And thank you for everyone taking time out of your day. No,
thank you both. It was a beautiful blend of industry insights and also the behind the scene of creating a superannuation fund. So fascinating. And dear members, I hope this webinar gave you practical knowledge and insights into sustainable finance, impact investing, and how powerful, I hope you are convinced now, it can be to align your finances and your super with action and positive action. Our community keeps growing. We have now over 2,500 members. That's fantastic, but I would love your help to grow even further. We need more people supporting sustainable finance, supporting great businesses like Make Your Mark and Bloom. So if you enjoyed our webinar today, please invite your friends, share with your colleagues and your friends. who might also find these conversations useful. Make sure you follow Make Your Mark on social media. They have a great Instagram account that shares a lot of wonderful content. Make sure you follow us as well on social media. We share a ton of content as well to equip you to use your money with power. I'd like to thank you all again for coming today and making the time to learn and be curious. By learning and choosing to support impact investing, sustainable finance, we can truly create a positive impact at scale. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone.